Okay, this is a Celtic blessing. May the blessing of light be upon you, light without and light within. May the blessed sunlight shine on you like a great peat fire, so that the stranger and friend may come and warm himself at it. And may light shine out of the two eyes of you, like a candle set in the window of a house, bidding the wanderer come in out of the storm. And may the blessing of the rain be upon you. May it beat upon your spirit and wash it fair and clean, and leave there a shining pool where the blue of heaven shines, and sometimes a star. And may the blessing of the earth be on you, soft under your feet as you pass along the roads, soft under you as you lie out on it, tired at the end of the day. And may it rest easy over you when at last you lie out under it. May it rest so lightly over you that your soul may be out from under it quickly, up and off and on its way to God. And now may the Lord bless you and bless you kindly. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much, Barbara. That was beautiful. I just would like to welcome you all again. I will start with a land acknowledgement while I'm multitasking. So I'll take a minute. As we live and worship on ground that does not belong to us, but comprises the traditional territories of our Indigenous neighbors, let us honor their land and heritage dating back over 10,000 years and continue still. Let us always remember that we belong to the land and to each other. And I would like to invite you to remember the importance of sharing space, that if you have more than 2 points to share, if you would hold them until others have had an opportunity to speak. And you might very well get a chance to mention those two additional thoughts. We just want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to share. Thank you. We will follow our usual format with Julie's introduction to chapter 4, questions for the group, then her introduction to chapter 5 with questions for breakout rooms. We will return to share 1 or 2 gleanings from the breakout rooms and end with a brief meditation and the suggested spiritual practice for the following week. So I would like to introduce Julie Young, who is a vestry member of Christchurch Coronado and the co-chair of their Peace and Justice Committee. And Parth and I think would, and Nancy would probably say she's a wonderful person to work with if you ever have a chance. So, Julie. Oops. Yeah, you got it.
Muted. Oh my God.
It's the trouble with muting oneself, remembering to unmute. Thank you, Diane. So chapter 4 is what we're going to talk about in the larger group. It's about poetry. The chapter title is Sacred Song, I don't know exactly if I'm pronouncing this correctly, Carmina Gadelica. Anybody want to correct me? I'm okay with that. So summary.
That's correct.
Okay, excellent. The Celts believed that poetry powerfully expressed the wisdom of the human soul. In their poems and songs, earth, wind, air, fire, and water are seen as sacred. Everything was seen as a manifestation of God. Their critics, though, considered their creative work to be pagan, as they echo the Eastern vision of a natural world that breathes with spirit. Formal opposition began in the 16th century with the Scottish Reformation and was intensified by Calvinism. The greatest blow, though, came with the Highland clearances, where about half of the population was evicted from their land to make way for more profitable uses. Nevertheless, many of the songs and poems were passed down in oral form and survived the displacement of so many people. And I quote, "Deep in this wisdom tradition is the belief that just as new life rises from the earth every spring, so new vision is forever trying to come forth from the human soul." I think this is very apropos of what is happening today. And so we have two questions. The first one, we will go from sadness to light. So the first question is, starting on page 117, John Philip Newell states that the story of the beauty and the suffering of the Celtic people is a universal story of what has happened to Native peoples and marginalized cultures throughout the world again and again. The sacredness of the native and the natural is being violated in our world today, unquote. So question number one is, how can the retelling of the Celtic people story help our awareness of what is happening now? Don't all jump in at once.
And don't forget to unmute yourself.
Oh, right.
Something
And
to say.
also you can use the raise hand feature, or until we get a lot of people talking, you can just talk.
Oh, Carolyn.
Oh, my heart just broke reading that story. Just even before he said, this is happening again and again, I thought, oh my gosh, this is the same thing over and over again. And maybe just hearing it again from a different perspective other than our Native people would help bring more awareness.
Thank you. Yes, it is a bit heartbreaking. I think Anne had her hand up next.
Thank you. I couldn't figure out the little thing. I think to echo Carolyn's comment, I think that I felt when I read that a poignancy, and I thought that it felt like it was coming from empathy, and it was relating. I think maybe maybe not as an aggressor, but as a more connecting with the culture that was stomped out.
Thank you. So Jane, I think you had your hand up next.
When we first came to San Diego, I was very interested in the Kumeyaay, and I read a book about them. And what made me so sad was the huge area of the land that they needed to sustain themselves, and that they were continent, that they used the land and what it gave, and the land never suffered under their care. And that has happened to Native peoples all over the world, especially to the Palestinians. And my uncle gave the first refugee camp in Bethlehem. They're a very old Roman Catholic family in Bethlehem. And one time, my husband was sitting at the door eating an apple, and a boy came by from one of the refugee camps and threw a stone at him. And he started crying, and his mother came to the door and she said, "He sees you eating an apple." She said they probably grew apples on his land, and he was forced to leave it, and he has no apple. So feel for him. So
Thank you, Jane. That is a poignant story.
I'm sorry.
So I
Anita is
think
next.
Susan Newland had her hand up
We
next, and
apologize,
then Anita
yes.
Martinez.
Susan,
Did you say
Susan, you're
Anita?
on mute if you want to take yourself off mute.
Yep, I had my Zoom hand up, but it didn't look like it was showing. So it was interesting. My husband asked me, what is happening today? The last time I remember we moved people off their land were when we moved the Cherokees and the other native tribes. And I said, oh no, we are discriminating today and who can use our land even now. And he goes, I don't understand what you're saying. And so I tried to explain how, at least my feeling is, who we let into our country as refugees is very skin toned. We did not let the Haitians in. We have not let the South Americans in that well. We send them back across the border, and yet we're grieving with open arms for the Ukrainians. And I grieve too. I don't mean to mitigate their need, but I really feel there is a discrimination that's going on in terms of who we accept and worry about as refugees. I also feel that when highways or freeways or whatever public need is going to be built through our cities, that the people who get displaced are in the Black and brown neighborhoods. And I've experienced that since I worked with the War on Poverty, where people were being displaced for a freeway going through Oakland, and they wanted to know what to do. And I can go on and on with that. The fact that we have so many no-knock warrants into Black and brown homes as opposed to white homes. The fact that there are more arrests and traffic stops and frisks for Black and brown people than white people. All of that is the same thing to me as what was experienced by the Celts.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. I think it seems true and it seems sad that we haven't learned. Anita.
Yes, hello. So what comes to mind to me is what's happening now. There's a group of Native American groups that have kind of banded together to protest the lithium mining that they're trying to do in the Salton Sea. And there's also another area up more north. I think it's near Winnemucca or Reno. You know, so, and their reasons are that this is sacred ground to them, you know, and they don't want that land to be used for that. And the other issue is that they're worried that the water will be contaminated by this mining. So, you know, this is again, you know, taking sacred ground and sacred property, or water is sacred to these people. It's sacred to all of us, really. You know, so this is, you know, this is what comes to mind to me when I read this chapter.
Yeah, it is very reminiscent of what we've seen more recently. Norma, I thought you had your hand up earlier. Do you have something?
Yeah. Well, you know, when I read this story, it just of the Scottish and the clearances, I just come from the country where my ancestors were responsible for that, and it just brought to mind throughout history how many times we have lost the culture, and how many times in history we have forgotten the lessons that have been taught by this. I mean, the British did it over in India, and we lost a lot of the culture there. And we did the same in Africa when we colonized that. And we just seem not to be able to learn from the mistakes that we have made so many times. I was very sad.
Yeah, thank you. Parth, did you want to say something?
May I just mention,
Oh.
Akiko was first?
Who? I'm sorry.
Sorry.
I
That's
didn't
okay.
see your hand.
That's okay.
Okay. Sorry, Parth. You'll have to wait. Akiko?
So when I read this chapter, I was reminded of Isabel Wilkerson's book Caste, which I know some of you also read. You know, she was talking about, she was drawing parallels between the race-based caste system in the US and Nazi Germany and the caste system in India. And I think sometimes when we're in the midst of a system, it's so hard to see what's happening, and just being able to look at systems that are a little bit at a distance from us helps us to see more clearly what's happening to us. And I feel like it's kind of a similar situation with what happened to the Celts and what is happening now today, that maybe, being able to see what happened with a little bit of distance will help us to recognize what is happening today.
Thank you. Thank you. So I think we'll have Parth and then Nancy Hardison, and then we'll move on to the second question. But if you have response to the first one, we're not that rigid. Parth.
Yeah. So what this reminded me of is I'm in Berkeley now. We drove up here from San Diego to see our son, and one of the first things we saw when we got off the highway coming into Berkeley was encampment of tents of homeless people. And it makes me think of the kind of communities we have and what we do then to other communities. So when I think of like how the Celts commute was, how they took care of each other, the way it was structured, the interdependence among everyone, and how the roles people took care of each other. And then this other type of community came in and ran, which a whole different way of being together. And so when I look at these, the same example of the homeless here, and I think of how it's growing in lots of other cities across our country. And I think of the kind of community as a nation, the communities that we're building. How do we take care of each other? How do we come back to that Celtic way of recognizing interdependence so that we nurture life and nurture the interdependence of it so that we're not taking land, we're not disrupting families, we're not hurting other people basically, but we're learning to live in a way where everyone thrives. Thank you.
That's a good segue to question number 2, but we still have to hear from Nancy Hardison before we move on to question 2.
Thanks. I want to reinforce what Parth was saying and just simply add that it harkens back to Pelagius, that the Celtic way is so opposed to the authoritarian power, money, etc. Culture that we have become accustomed to and thrive on. It's time we let it go and went back to a
She freeze, or did I freeze?
So no, I think
She
Nancy
freeze.
froze.
Well, I think we got what she was saying. So we're going to go on to question 2 because it really does speak to what Parth and Nancy were talking about.
Sorry, Nancy, you froze. So.
Yeah, but we got the idea, and it is a perfect segue to the second question. How does their story and the poetry inspired by Celtic spirituality help us find light and perhaps even change the direction of the future? This is what we used to call the $64,000 question. I think it's worth more than that these days, but anyway, anybody want to take a stab at that? Larry.
Actually, I wanted to take a stab at the previous question. The thing that seems like nobody really was talking about in what's happening now is what's happening in Ukraine. And it strikes me that the song that is being sung by President Zelensky is a song of hope and strong culture in the face of huge adversity, probably as much adversity as the clearances. And those people are thriving on the energy in the face of unfathomable odds against them.
Thank you.
So I think his song is as powerful as the Celtic songs.
Indeed, and it is hopeful. So we have Barbara O'Malley and then Karen Katz.
In answering the second question, how can we find light in our present world? I think we need to start with ourselves, see the light in ourselves, and then look to the other and see the light in the other. Then we can move on to cultures, cities, communities, and our world.
Thank you, Barbara. Karen, did you have? You're on mute, Karen.
Loud behind me. We've got airplanes landing. Let me know. What I'm thinking about is that not only question 1 and question 2 is that where we are living now, what we've grown up with is the driving forces on our life have to do with prestige in many ways. That's part of our path forward. We've been preaching, doing, I can't say it, preaching. We've been raised with the idea that the future is ours as long as we work hard enough. We follow a good path for education. That capitalism is 100% good. That politics and being on the right side is also important. That's very different than the way the Celtic, what was driving their energy. We believe in power and in responsibility, and taking on responsibility puts us to a degree in the driver's seat for our own lives. The Celts weren't like that, and they weren't preaching that. Wealth and power, however you want to come by it, is a driving force. And nowhere in the way we were raised or live in our society, socialize in our society, has anything to do much of the time with sacrifice, what it takes to bring other and gather others around us. It requires personal sacrifice. And that doesn't mean you give up everything, because if you do, you will not have the means to actually help or to guide others or to understand, because all your energy would go to trying to just keep a roof over your head and food on the table. You don't want to do that, but you have to give up an awful lot to try and equalize.
Yeah, I think you're right. Thank you. We are a very self-centered society and not other-centered. So it would require just a huge shift in our whole paradigm. But I want to hear from Richard.
Yes, just finished a Peace and Justice Committee meeting, and I had proposed a forum, which is based on a program sponsored by our national church, and it's called From Many One, or E Pluribus Unum. And it has to do with engaging people who may be of different persuasions and different ways of seeing things with 4 questions. What do you love? Where do you feel loss? Where do you feel hurt? And what do you dream of a better life? And to address those questions, we have come up with a forum date of May 22nd, Sunday morning at 9 o'clock. So I think that that's secure, but we'll find out, but that's what we're aiming for. So I think that this provides a way, it's not the cure-all, but it certainly provides a way of being in touch and moving in a deeper way by talking about things that people would normally talk about, and then to share with one another and find our commonality.
So tell us again those questions. They seem to very
Yes.
relevant.
What do you love? Where do you feel loss? Where do you hurt? And what do you dream?
Thank you. So, Norma, did you have something that you wanted to say?
Well, I was just thinking that the Celts emphasized respect and equality, and that is the direction that we need to move in. Equal opportunity.
Yeah, I think so.
For
So
everyone.
kind of comes together with the work we've been doing in Caste and Sacred Ground, and
Yeah.
we're at a crossroads there. Anybody else before we go into the break rooms? We have a couple more minutes. Susan?
You're muted, Susan.
Sorry, thank you. Looking at this question immediately reminded me of a podcast that I had been listening to ever since we went through the Sacred Ground diocesan study that Parth was a part of. There's a podcast called Code Switch, and that introduced me to a terminology that is used in the Black community about how they feel they need to interact with the white community. In other words, I have to change my code. I have to speak and act in a different way. And it never occurred to me that, and it should have, because I always say, like, oh, I'm trying to reach out, I'm trying to be receptive, what have you. But maybe I'm the one that needs to change my code to speak to minorities within our community. And I keep thinking, here in Southern California, we have such an outstanding opportunity. We have, almost 50% Hispanic population in and around us, in our kids' schools, all around, not in our churches. And something is missing there. And I don't know if we should be reaching out to find sister churches, other Christians that might want to celebrate a day together, or how we could do it. Well, we can reach out into the Black community the same way, reach out to some of the Black Baptist churches. I would love to live through some of their music, which is fantastic. And it's a whole different way of experiencing worship than what we do. We have music, but it's not the same emotion that you would get out of their worship. So I keep wondering, why does our code get in the way of interacting with a diversity of people? And how do I need to change my code in order to do that? And I don't know the good answer to that.
And that's a great question. And I think it leads into the next chapter, which we're going to be talking about in the breakout rooms. But I will just give you a summary. And then, oh goodness, Diane's way ahead of me. She's got the questions in the chat, and they're kind of lengthy. So it's good they're there because you won't remember them. This chapter is about imagination. In the Celtic world, the imagination is a faculty of knowing. To be made of God is to be made of sacred imagination. And Alexander John Scott brought this to light in his writings. He believed that the heart of Christian wisdom is the belief that the divine and the human are one. As such, he was opposed to the doctrine of original sin, which of course brought him right up against the church, for which he was denounced, but he nevertheless continued in his teaching and political activism. So the first question I would encourage you, when you get into your break rooms, there will be a leader, and the first thing you'll need to do is assign somebody that'll be taking kind of report back. But when you introduce yourselves, I would encourage you to use this first question as something of an icebreaker, which is, according to Alexander John Scott, the awareness of the sacred that we access in nature is not doctrinal, or propositional thinking. Instead, it belongs to, quote, some deeper part of the human being. And so the icebreaker question for your group is, have you personally experienced this kind of knowing, and what did it feel like at that moment? And then the second question you can read in the chat. This is a very deep question. I will admire you if you get it answered, but it's about the revolution that we need, that we talked about the need for in the other chapter. So Diane, I think, do you have anything more you want to say before you put people in the breakout room? We have 15 minutes, so be sure you get to question 2. Not a lot of time.
Yeah, I will see you all later. It appears that everybody is back, and what we will do is Julie will ask people from the breakout room to please share 1 or 2 bits of information that you learned while you were in there.
Right, and we have 2 minutes each, so Diane and I will try to remember. And here I was the leader of my group, and I don't remember what group I was in.
You were.
I can tell you. I
You'll
just
tell
have
me,
to,
okay?
You were in group 2.
Okay, group 2. So last week we thought we would just ask for volunteers, and we weren't sure everybody would want to report out, but everybody did. So I think we'll just go, we won't do it that way. We'll just go around this time. So group 1, oh, Richard, why don't you start since you have your hand up? What group were you in?
I don't know.
I'll tell you,
Bad as I
Richard.
am.
4. He was in 4.
Number 4.
Okay, we're starting with group 4.
Yeah, we had 3 of us, Parth and Teresa and myself. And Parth found, we talked about the ineffable, which is what we thought, what the whole thing is about. Finds the ineffable in centering prayer. And she felt like she was coming home with that contemplative tradition and peace with the ineffable. So now, then I reported saying that I find the ineffable in the dance, especially liturgical dance. And then Teresa chimed in with retreat, where she found in touch with the ineffable, and precious moments, which cannot be described. And then when it helps you to recognize truth, goodness, and beauty. And the revolution is needed by having the humanities. Why are we getting an echo? I don't know why I'm getting an echo.
I do not know. Maybe everyone can mute
Why don't you
unless
mute
they're
on?
talking.
I can't, I have to be in here. I'm losing my power.
Okay, well, why don't you shut off? Why don't you shut off your thing?
I tried.
Okay, well then, Teresa went on to say the education, we should emphasize the humanities, the liberal arts, rather than just being lopsided in business. And then we had a fun reflection on the book Summerhill. I don't know whether any of you know that one, but both Parth and I know about Summerhill, which is
Summerhill.
a group for people who juvenile delinquents that get together, and you can do what you want as long as you don't harm one another and you don't harm yourself. So then what happens and develops out of that is a wonderful paradigm. So I think I'll stop there.
Thank you. That was perfect. So I see Karen's hand is up. Karen Garcia. And what group were you in? Do you remember? Do you know? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry. I believe we were group 8. Anita M and Nancy H were in my group. And we talked about that we all feel a very deep connection when we're in nature, that it helps us to reset our mental state, our soul, if you will. I enjoyed hiking, as does Anita. Nancy loves the plants and the trees and being outside. And we talked about birds as messengers for us, and also that's a native connection there, that many native groups feel birds are messengers. Then on the second portion. We talked about education and how we do feel that education right now is moving away from more liberal arts situation into what can you do to earn money? And that unless people are going to religious-based institutions, that they don't really get a lot about liberal arts thinking and that soul learning or awareness in a formal education. And that makes us sad. We wish that more people would do that. And Nancy talked about working at Point Lemmon Nazarene and trying to impart that to her students. And we also talked about how that's juxtaposition with many younger people, especially, are saying that they feel more spiritual than religious. Yeah, where are they? We're wondering, where do they get that connection? Yes, perhaps through nature, but that the bottom line is that if we do not behave as though we're interconnected, that we can say we're all airy fairy spiritual, but if we don't behave like we're spiritual, now we don't believe that we're interconnected and our behavior doesn't reflect that, then it's somewhat for naught. That we feel that all needs to be in alignment.
Thank you, Karen. That was a great summary. Any other group want to volunteer before I start calling on groups? So how about we hear from group 1? Who is in group 1?
That was Nancy's group.
Well, I was the so-called host of that group, and we completely did not follow the rules. We didn't appoint a scribe, and we didn't discuss what we would report, but we did have a lovely and lively conversation about the diversity of the ways that we human beings experience the world and interpret the world and the variety of things we can do. We heard a wonderful story about Jane's son-in-law, who's just a genius with fixing things and making things and building things. And we talked about the way that sometimes we don't know right now the answer. We're drawing a blank, but tomorrow it'll probably come to us. And that's the way it is for some of us some of the time. We just had a lovely time, but don't have anything else in particular to share. But I would invite my cohorts in group 1 if you would like to add anything. No, they don't.
Okay. All right. So group 2, I was a leader of that, and nobody really wanted to talk, so I'll start, and they said they would chime in if I didn't cover something. So the first question was wonderful. It was just great to hear people's experience of deep knowing, and by and large, it happened in nature, and by and large, it happened when people were young. Mine was a little bit of an outlier where God actually just talked to me. I mean, literally spoke to me at a point in my life where I was just trying to figure out something in my life. The second question we didn't have a whole lot of time for. We agreed that the current while education is necessary, it isn't exactly, public education isn't quite doing it. And Jane suggested camperships to Camp Stevens, which I think was a wonderful idea because it cuts across the need for education of lower income, and also education of nature, which is different than what they're getting in the public schools. And we thought the revolution has to start small with a core group and then move out from there. Anybody else in my group want to say something that I
just like to add about the camperships at Camp Stevens. Mainly they're for kids from the inner city who don't have a chance to connect with nature where they live.
Yeah, a lot of them go to the refugee community. I do know that. So that's really great. So that was group 2 and group 3.
I I was supposed to be taking notes, but really what I did was write parts of ideas down. So I'm going to have to ask my peers to jump in if I get it wrong or misrepresent. I think that as we've been hearing, people really do seem to find that nature does put them in touch with their spirituality. And Roseanne made a point. Okay, so in my group, I'm sorry, it was Connie Dadman, Roseanne Myers, Susan Floyd, and we had a nice discussion. Our industrialized society has degraded honoring past generations, which I thought was kind of interesting. She kind of went back to her understanding of Native American beliefs that talk about 7 generations, which I believe is echoed quite across many different things, and thinking that if you're the expression of 7 generations of your people, you know, how do you live up to that, and how do you honor that and represent that well, and also that there's such a degradation of life and the valuing of that intergenerational experience. Connie had a really delightful story, and if it's okay, Connie, if I kind of try to tell it in brief, she went to her yard today to do the quiet meditation, and she took a chair into an area that she doesn't usually sit in the garden under a tree, and she heard a lot of noise, and she realized that there was a squirrel in the tree. And while Connie felt that she was, you know, in her garden experiencing nature, the squirrel was very upset because she was really in his space. And he was letting her know that he wasn't having anything to do with this. It was not acceptable. And I think it kind of made, if I may, Connie, reflect differently on possession of nature, place in nature, and interaction with nature. The nature has a hand in this as well. And then I think we really would have gotten onto a really very animated and passionate conversation about education. However, by the time we got there, everybody agreed that education is very important, and that a point was made by Connie that, you know, each person should be encouraged to reach their highest potential. And I think that there's a general concern in our group about this sort of anti-education and the idea that education is a you know, Marxist. I mean, that's my words, I'm getting there. It's a Marxist event now that's, you know, there's this terrible kind of sub thing happening. I don't know how to say it right.
Yeah, there is indeed.
Yeah, so I'll stop there, but I think you all know.
Thank you, that was great. So I guess that was group 3. Group 4 is already reported. So how about group 5?
Okay, that was me, Carolyn. Sorry about the disturbance earlier when I had to move into this room because I lost power on my iPad. So there were just 2 of us ending up in our group, Akiko and myself. So we had a lot of time for sharing. And the first question, Akiko came from a background that wasn't Christian at all, as more atheist, but found herself through being drawn into beauty, music, nature, art. She felt God drawing her into relationship through that. And then my experience was going to summer camps in Northern California, where you'd be sent out with your Bible in the morning for meditation and just sit somewhere in nature and meditate. And I felt close to God and close to nature in that. And then the idea that this is a opposite from a rational brain type experience, this drawing into true beauty into God. And then the question about higher education, well, Akiko harkened back to the Robin, well, Kimmer, was that her last name? The Braiding Sweetgrass, where she was trying to bring in the indigenous learning into higher education that at first was not at all welcoming. And finally, she was successful in helping a graduate student get accepted into a program, or maybe a thesis work. Anyway, and we talk about the how much trees have to teach us about community, how they care for each other, and model to us how we might be in community. And then I mentioned that the university that Richard and I went to, the University of Redlands, is trying to bring back more liberal arts into their education as a balance to all the technology, math, science, all that kind of stuff, which is also important, of course. But what about this? What about art and nature? And then we were talking about how school programs for kids are incorporating more school gardens, and how kids can learn where their food comes from, and hopefully will instill a love of nature early on that can carry through, even if they grow apart from it, maybe during college or whatever, that young adult stuff, it will hold on to that love.
Okay, I think we have.
Julie just froze.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, you just froze. I was just going to say group 6. Someone from group 6 or group 7, either one.
Oh, sorry, I was
7.
muted again. Group 6.
Okay. Whoever's
Okay. There were 4 of us, Jack and John and Joan, and me. No J in my name, but all 4 of us had an awareness that was brought, that knowing awareness brought to us through nature experience at one level or another, at one time or another. One by being inspired by a grove of aspen tree and wanting to answer his EFM question of being reincarnated as an aspen tree and being connected to the community through roots. One finding just a deep feeling of being in nature and nature speaking to her. One of our guys was talking about sinking in a river and realizing that nature was in charge of him, and the fact that it made him relax so much that he was able to be rescued by a friend of his that was in training, just because he relaxed his body and stopped fighting it. And we all sort of spoke about knowing injustice when we saw it as kids. Somehow it was just innate to us to know that something was wrong. In terms of the education, our group was fascinated by Scott's working man's college and wondering what exactly that was. Was it like a trade school or what? But it led us into a discussion of how much good education for tradescraft is needed. We educate, on computers, on electronics, on business, on everything else, but we also need good education for the people that fix all the things in our lives. And how important a liberal arts component and teaching of understanding critical thinking, understanding science, not the technicalities of science, but what science does or how it works in order to answer the questions of our lives, and hoping that that would be included. And we also talked a bit about how unaffordable higher education is for too many people these days, and feeling that something needed to be done there. So that was, I think, you guys, anything else?
That was great. Thank you. I think we have one. Do we have one more group?
Yes, Barbara's speaking next.
Oh, okay.
Hi, I was with Helena and Norma and Diane, and we talked about how the need is great to connect both with nature and with each other. And we talked about going to a special place, going to the beach, getting out in nature. And I shared that I couldn't because I had been sick for a long time. And the imagination will take us to that special place. We've got music, we've got poetry, we've got imagination. We also talked about how we treat others is really important, to be accountable and in following Jesus, and how to live in solidarity. We're not taught that. And we're there. I shared that I've seen a real lack of respect, and all you have to do is watch the news, watch the political arena in this country, and there seems to be a lack of respect, not only for Mother Nature, but for each other. We've got to work on that. We talked about our churches too, and what we're doing and participating in small groups, and that's helping. And more outreach is needed to communities that are different from us. That's it.
Thank you. Okay. So now, as is our custom, we're going to do a short meditation. And so I invite you to hold your body, relax, hold your body in a comfortable position of alertness. And with your eyes closed, if you can listen first to the words of awareness I will read, and then we will have a moment or two of silence, and I will let you know when to open your eyes. So if you can close your eyes. First, we'll have a word of an awareness, and then some silence, and then a prayer of awareness. Alexander John Scott taught that in every moment and encounter of life, we can imagine the intermingling of heaven and earth, time and eternity, spirit and matter. Together, we can dream our way forward into what has never been before. Keeping your eyes closed, rest in contemplative awareness to reflect on the ways in which this wisdom applies to our lives. Please keep your eyes closed as I recite this prayer. Awake, O my soul, to the sacred dreams that are stirring within you. Awake to the imaginations of the heart and the cherished hope of what is yet to be. Do not be afraid. Awake, O my soul, to the sacred dreams that are stirring within you. Listen silently for a moment within the sacredness of your being. Awake, O my soul, awake. Open your eyes and gently return to the group.
Thank you so much, Julie.
Very beautiful.
Really beautiful and an enjoyable session.
From the book.
Yes. Yes. So I would just like to remind you that I will send next week's spiritual practice, hopefully much sooner, and the session 3 resource